Okay, welcome to another iPad painting tutorial. On today's tutorial, I'm going to paint a scene that has the Northern Lights in it. We're being pelted by emissions from the sun at the moment, and apparently lots of people, although not here in the UK, but lots of people are getting really great views of the Northern Lights across the sky at night. And so it's really got me thinking about it and got me inspired. So I'll do a tutorial about the Northern Lights, just because they're really beautiful to look at anyway, even on a photograph. So I'm using the app Procreate. I've got an A4 default canvas that I've opened. And if you want to follow along with the exact colours, then I've created these colours and the colour codes are down in the video description. Or there is a link that goes straight to my Patreon page and you can download the colour file there for free. In terms of the brushes, I'm going to keep it really simple. I'm going to go within the airbrushing. I'm going to be using the soft brush, the medium brush and the medium hard brush. Now for the last part of the tutorial, I might just go to my sketching brushes and use the artist crayon. Perhaps, we'll see how it goes. So if you follow along and you're really pleased with your results, then do make sure to post them, share them with me in my Facebook group or my Instagram, tag me there, and the links for both of those things are again down in the video description. Okay, with all that being said, let's get started. So on layer 1, we're going to go to our colours. I'm just going to drag the colour onto layer 1 and you can see it's pretty much black, but if we go to the colour disc, it isn't actually, there is a little bit of movement there. It's just a little bit back from the solid black and it's just a hint of blue about it. We're not going to move off this layer, however. We're going to start adding more colours. So we'll go to the colours again. We'll move the second colour along, go to our brushes. This time we're going to start on the airbrushing with this soft brush and we'll put it up to about 15% size and about 50% opacity. And I'm just going to bring in this colour from about, well, our horizon line is going to be lower down. So we'll just press it a few times, bring it up and let it start to disappear and certainly at the top corners. So we're still keeping some of the black, but not much in the top and the corners. But then we'll have more and more of this very dark blue, but it's got a richness about it a little further down. Next thing, we're going to go to the adjustments. We're going to go to the Gaussian Blur and we're going to slide it across. And I'm going to take it all the way to 100%. Okay, I'm going to create another layer. I like to keep things relatively separate just so that we can tweak and amend things as we go along. And for this layer, we're going to go back to the brushes. I'm going to put it on the medium brush. I'm going to put it really low down. So we're going to go to 1%. We're going to put it up to about 80% opacity. And I'm going to go to my colours. I've used the first two, but I'm going to go to the other end of this row now. I'm going to use these two light colours. I'm going to go for the 1 second in. From the right, first of all, go back to my canvas, and I'm just going to carefully, with my hand rested on the screen, start to add some points, and I'll keep them quite random. I'm only going to do the top left corner of my canvas though, and I'm going to allow them to bunch together in places, but I'm going to carefully, just with a variety of different pressure, start to add some stars. So don't keep them too artificially spaced apart, because if you just keep them all equal distance apart and you're pressing on the same way every time, it's going to look really fake like this. So you don't want that. You might have the occasional one that really does, you can press on quite a bit, but you don't want to do the same thing all the way over. And I'm going to change colour. I'm going to alternate between these two, because one's quite a lot brighter than the other, as you'll see. Just a hint different. It's not the kind of subtle detail you're going to notice particularly, but it will just create a little bit more depth within your scene. So we're just doing this top corner, and there's a reason for that, which I'll show you in a moment. So remember to get lots of little subtle points in there as well, not just the obvious bright ones. Press lightly. Perhaps we'll go back to the first colour, it's slightly duller. And if you wanted to, you could always turn the opacity down to help with this. You could put it more around 50%. That way you don't have to worry about being a bit heavy-handed quite as much. I mean, some of these stars are going to get obliterated by things that go over the top anyway, but we'll put them in. And you want to be able to zoom in and see that you haven't done these kind of marks. They only appear if you're trying to hover your brush and do it this way. So if you've got it set so you've got palm rejection on, then it's quite easy. And you can just place your hand on it and you can just carefully put a point and it doesn't slide on the screen. Maybe a few more in this corner, just so it doesn't look rounded. We want to be able to duplicate this rectangle in a moment, so it needs to be up to the very edges, ideally. So we're still on layer 2, but we're going to go to the selection tool. We're going to choose rectangle. And we're just going to drag from that corner and just select the area that we've created stars in. Then we can 3-finger drag down on the screen. We can copy, and then we can 3 fingers down, paste. And it gives us a box now, an extra box that we can actually move. And we're going to start filling in the rest of our canvas with this effect. Now you can flip it horizontally and flip it vertically if you want to keep it appearing more random. You want to avoid symmetrical patterns within the stars, although it's going to be subtle. Your eye is quite good at picking up patterns, so we want to avoid that detection. So we can do the same again, 3 fingers down, paste, move it across, deselect it, and you can see we've just created a really nice band of stars all the way across now. It really doesn't take a lot of effort. We do have now 3 layers worth, so we could pinch them all together. A little bit tricky, but is doable. We can duplicate that whole row. Now we can go to the transform tool again, and we can move that entire lot down. Maybe we could flip it horizontally, just line it up again. Again, we can go back to it, pinch those 2 layers together, duplicate it again. That's too bright, you can see it is duplicated, so we're going to move that down anyway. And we're not going to see most of these because we're going to do some mountains, but there you go. So we've created our starry sky. So we're going to create another layer, go back to our colours. I've used the first 2 colours. I'm going to go back to layer 1 in fact, and I'm going to create another layer above that, and it is sandwiched between the 2 layers that I've just created, so it's underneath the stars layer. I may do another layer in a moment on top of the stars, and it will start to remove them slightly, but I'm not quite ready to do that. So on layer 3, I'm going to go to the 3rd colour along, which I haven't used yet. I'm going to put it back on the soft brush, back up to about 15%, in fact it was still on there, and we're going to hopefully still find it on the 50%, we do. And we're going to put this lower down, somewhere around where we imagine the horizon is going to be, and I'll just let it creep up a little bit. Again, it's pencil pressure as well as opacity. I'm just letting it just glance and glide across the screen there, and then I'm going over it more times and pressing on more as it gets lower down. Now I don't really feel like I need to use the Gaussian blur, but we'll do it a little bit in case you've managed to do it and you've still got streaks. You can see the percentage here at the top, and we just slide, and I'm just going to slide into about 25%. That's enough. Okay, this time I'm going to go up to layer 2, so the very top of my stack, and I'm going to press the plus symbol again, creates a new layer. We're going to go to the 4th colour in this time. This predominantly needs to be in the area where the mountains are going to appear. So this is the actual mist and the atmosphere that is probably going to obscure the stars a little bit. So I'm fine with that happening at this point. So that's why I'm doing it a layer above the stars, because it represents mist and cloud and atmosphere that is actually going to interfere with the stars. So you see, I've just done a few swipes. Again, it was on the 15% and the 50% opacity. A few swipes lightly to begin with, and then pressing on a little bit more. Again, we can go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, slide it across a little bit just until you're happy that you've got that smooth transition. But it looks quite nice at 40% there, I'd say, so let's leave it there. So we're going to place in the land and the mountains. So we're going to create yet another layer, go back to our colours. We're going to use the 5th colour in and the 6th colour in as well. So we'll start with the 5th, go back to our brushes. We're going to use the medium hard brush for this. And we're going to put it at about 4% size and just dial it back a little bit from 100%, just so it can create a little bit more texture and layers. So we'll put it at about 80%, and I'm just going to start bringing in now some mountains, some points of interest in our scene. So I'm keeping it really rough to begin with, and then you can decide where to exaggerate, where to increase the scale and the kind of shapes that you want within your mountain scene. And then, if we want to increase the size of the brush, just get rid of this bottom section. We're going to add more things to that area anyway, but let's just get rid of what we see at the bottom of that. Now obviously you can zoom in now to the top edge of our mountains and refine it. If you want to do it with the brush, you can do, or if you long press on the eraser and then go to that, you'll see you've also got the same brush selected for the eraser as well. So that could be really useful if you want to do something similar with the size of the brush, and you can go in and you can just remove the bits of that top edge. Perhaps with the eraser it might be a better way to do it than actually adding. So the removal of some bits is actually going to be a really good way of doing it. If you're not sure how to make up these kinds of shapes, then maybe get a reference of a real mountain just to assist. I'm kind of making these shapes up as I go along, but that's fine. If you're not entirely confident with doing that, then yeah, get a reference. You should never feel funny about having a reference. You know, it's far more sensible to have a reference in front of you if you're still fairly early on in your creative journey. If you're not got enough experience painting and drawing mountains, then make sure you've got something to look at. It makes obvious sense. I'm going to go back to my brush rather, just to add a bit more height, perhaps over here. So I'm going to create another layer. I like to keep things on separate layers. It just helps. If something goes wrong, it's just easier to deal with, easier to fix. Just gives you that little bit more confidence about going for it. So we're going to go to the third colour in now. It's just a little bit lighter than the one we've just used. So it's third in from the right. We're going to put the size down to about 2%. And again, on about the 80% opacity. It's a little bit lighter. And we're going to have things in the top area that are just bouncing off bits of the mountain scene. And you're probably hardly going to notice this. And that's pretty much what I want. We're going to have some really dramatic light features here that are going to impact on that mountain and just illuminate it in some areas. So we can just use it to bring out a sense of slight depth. So it's just glancing off the side of the mountains here. I'll just zoom in a little bit more so you can see that perhaps. So it's just picking up the edges here and there, and perhaps you can use it to show that there's depth and there's layers within that mountain range. Just some subtle shapes really. Then I'm actually going to keep on the same layer for this. I'm going to go back to the first colour we had, which was this black. Now it wasn't solid black as I pointed out before, but it's pretty dark. We're going to turn the size of that brush down to the lower end of 2%, and we're just going to get in there now. And as we get towards the bottom part of the mountain range, some bits of the snow are going to be revealed or disappear, and we're going to start seeing like rock, which is going to have a darker appearance. Obviously the rock doesn't bounce the light around, doesn't reflect it back at us, so any dark areas are likely to be the rock areas. So I'm going to turn the strength of that colour down. It's on 2% size, but the opacity 80% was way too much. I want it more like about 20%. So you'll see it, but it's not going to be incredibly dramatic. And if you want to build up the strength of it, then we can do that incrementally. But I'm just going to start bringing in. I'll zoom in a little bit. I tend to prefer to work zoomed out so you see the overall effect without getting too heavily bogged down in details. But because the subtle difference, or the colour difference is so subtle rather, I need to zoom in just so you can see what I'm doing really. And I'm just adding a little bit of texture, keeping it kind of broken. And I'm just looking at that top shape now. I don't like that there, so let's go and fix that. Maybe I'll go back in with the eraser. It's still set to what it was before, I believe. Make sure I'm on the layer would help. Just shave off that top shape. It looks a bit more naturalistic. And that's the problem when you zoom in, which, you know, I'm not saying you shouldn't zoom in, but you do start to notice all the little fine-tuning details that you need to fix. And do spend as much time as you want on these. I'm showing you how to breeze through them at quite a pace, but feel free to pause the video, take longer on some of these sections, get it even more detailed than I'm showing you. And then if you're proud of it, do make sure to share them with me like I explained before on my Facebook group, because it's not just me that posts. There's loads of other people that join that group and share their work, and there's just some amazing art that goes on there. And obviously other people can give feedback as well as me, and it's a great community there, I think. Or you can just tag me on Instagram as well, and I will get to see it, and I do look at them all. As long as you tag me, I'll definitely get to see it. Okay, so perhaps in these slightly more distant ones, you can see that this one, perhaps because it sweeps down here, is a bit more prominent, and there's some slightly more distance ones here, especially on this section over here. So maybe you can just add a slight hint that there's a mottled texture there without pressing on too much. And I'll just move across, adding more texture. Again, it's quite a subtle feature, so you're not going to see the exact brush marks unless you super zoom in, but presuming you're going to look at it zoomed out, then it's going to have a minimal impact, which is ideal really. In fact, I'm going to just create a horizon line there, just so we know where to do this up to. We're going to add some lighter colours over the top, and I'm just increasing the brush size to about 5%, and we'll keep it at the low opacity, but I'm just going to create a point at which we know the bottom of the mountains are. So I'm just going to turn that just so I can do that easily. So that's where the bottom area is going to be. And we'll go over that with a much lighter colour in a moment, but it just helps me really understand where the bottom of the mountain range is. then I can return that brush down to 2%, and it's still at 20% opacity, and I can just have these shapes now blending off into that bottom area. And hopefully you'll see the benefit of that in a moment when I start adding some lighter colours over the top again. So I'm allowing the brush to sort of tap and create texture. Just going to move along, allowing it to perhaps reach up a little bit higher up on our mountain in places. You could always turn the size of the brush down even further. You can see even within 2%, so we have the top end of 2% there, and you can see the circle getting smaller and smaller until it gets to the bottom end of 2%. There's quite a lot of difference just within that 1%. So I'm going down to the bottom end of 2%, and I'm adding a bit more fine-tuned detail perhaps at the top. And as we come down here, all those little points start to gather together. Perhaps you've got bigger areas that the snow isn't clinging to as much. I normally leave my winter tutorials till a little bit later. It's actually winter here in the UK, but I just really wanted to do the Northern Lights. So that will do. I'm going to add more effects, and hopefully, because it's subtle anyway, the light in the sky is really going to subdue everything that we've just done and make it still important but less obvious. So perhaps we'll do the ground. We're going to go create another layer. I'm going to go to my soft brush. I'm going to go to my colours. I'm going to this bottom row. I'm going to use the first colour on the bottom row, and we're going to put it at around 4% size, and I'm going to turn it down to about 30% opacity. And I'm just going to choose a point and bring it all the way across, hold it, and you can adjust it now because it's created a snap to a straight line, and you can adjust it somewhere like this. I actually feel like I want to move that slightly down, so I can go to my transform tool and I can just move that line a little bit down, and I feel a bit happier about that placement. I'm actually going to continue that process, so I can add a bit more, I can go over it, bring it down, maybe increase the size of the brush now up to 10%, add a bit more of that colour. I'm going to create another layer. I'm going to go to the second colour in. I'm going to do similar again, but I'm going to reduce the size of the brush to about 3%, and we're still on the 30% opacity, and I'm just starting to bring in a little lower down some hints of more texture, things going on in this landscape. Nothing too dramatic. Perhaps even turn it down a smidge further to 2%, just to create little bits of anomalies and texture perhaps. And then we can always, I'll stay on the same layer for this. I'll go to the last colour on the bottom row, and I'm just creating a bit more broken texture. And in fact, let's attempt this on a new layer. I'm going to go to my brushes, and I said I might use this earlier on, so I'm going to try it. I'm going to go to my sketching and the artistic crayon. So we'll put the texture or the opacity up to about 70%, so 4% size. In fact, let's reduce that. Let's put it at the top end of 2% size and 70% opacity. And we're just going to allow that to bring in some texture. You can see I've zoomed in, changed the angle just so I can control where it's going a bit more. But I just want to create it subtly. I can reduce that even further, in fact, to the 2%. Just bring it in places. Okay, let's go for the main event. The main event of this landscape is to do the actual lights in the sky. So I'm going to go back to my layers. I'm going to go to the mountain range, which is where I put the first detail. And I'm going to go to the layer underneath that. So in this example, it's layer 4. That's where I put some of the lights to begin with, or some of the mist and the atmosphere. I'm going to press the plus symbol, create a new layer. So on this layer, we're going to select the first colour on the middle row. And you can see it's, if I show you on here, if I put the opacity up, it's quite a vibrant colour, but we're going to set it at the low opacity to begin with. So again, we're on this new layer. We're going to go to the soft brush. We've gone to the first row in the middle, or the first colour on the middle row. We're going to put the size of the brush at about 5% and the opacity quite low, about 50% should do it. And we can experiment with this. It's on a whole new layer, and if it goes wrong, well, you'll see there's things that we can do to this. So we're just going to create some sweeping lines that cut across, and it's quite easy to build up a dramatic effect with this. So we're going to create the effect of the colour sweeping across the sky. And just using light touches, maybe have it in broken sections. And what we can also do is we can go to our smudge tool. If we long press on that and click on it, you see that the soft brush has now jumped across to the smudge tool as well. So what we can do with that is, if we have that somewhere around 3% and let's try 100% opacity, we can just allow that to break and create an interesting effect on the actual streaks of colour as well, streaks of light. So if we drag up from the actual colour, we'll create these streaks, but if we go from underneath, it will actually create an interesting break in that texture as well. So we can use a combination, drag up from underneath or drag up from the colour to create either a streak or a gap. And perhaps we'll do a little bit of that down in the bottom section as well. And in addition to that, we can also go to the adjustments. We can go to the liquify. We can go to the push tool. Perhaps just turn the pressure down to about 30% and the size of the brush however we want it. So I'll put that around 40%. And if we go on here, we can also distort and amend and push it around. Now you want to be careful not to create that kind of effect. It's not going to look too good, but we can drag it up a little bit, push it down, move it around to wherever we want it. I'm going to move along my colours, the next colour, go back to my brushes. We're still on the soft brush, same settings, so it's still on 5% size and 50% opacity. And again, I'm just going to start going into these areas and pressing super lightly. In fact, let's turn the opacity down so you don't have to press quite as lightly. So we'll go on 20% opacity. That way you can be a little bit more confident, press a few more times, build up the glow in certain areas. Maybe turn the size of the brush down to 3% and just pick out certain bits. In fact, let's go really low with the brush, 2%. Get in there and really exaggerate perhaps some of these textures. So I'm showing division quite clearly at this point, so you can see that within this general misty area, I'm just allowing it to splinter off into streaks, stripes. They're all generally going straight up, and almost they're kind of going up to an imaginary horizon point, a vanishing point near the top. So maybe they're slightly angled at this side and slightly angled at that side. I haven't done that too much, but I could exaggerate that a bit more now. I can do that with the smudge tool, turn the size of the brush on the smudge tool up to 5%. It's on 100% opacity, and I can just encourage these to that angle. It works as a way of extending it and also diminishing it. If you go backwards on that, then you can actually reduce it too. So use it to your advantage in both directions. So you can see I've extended it, or I can go beyond it and push it backwards too. Both are really useful at times. Maybe just do a combination, blur it in a little bit. Create a new layer, just so I'm not disturbing too much of that, because I want to create almost like a faint bluey colour behind it now. So I'm going to skip the green first. I'm going to go to this blue colour, check my brush size. So I'm going to put it up again to about the 5%. It's on quite low opacity at 20%, and I'll put it below the green colours in fact, so I'll move it below layer 10. So I want it almost to be extending on that green shape, but not over the top. So I might even reduce the opacity a touch more. So put it down to 10%. It's a really subtle effect now that I can build up gradually. You can still press on quite a bit and it's quite powerful, but if you press on lightly and it's at 10%, you can really feel like you're in control. You can build it up step by step when you're happy with it. I do think it's much nicer to work gradually, incrementally. I think if you rush at these kind of things and you go straight in there with the boldest colours, then you know that impatience is going to show in your work, and actually you're not going to like the overall effect. You're going to give up sooner. It's better to just go at these things slowly, have the patience, take the time, slow down, and actually does generally create a more satisfying experience. So I've just reduced the size of the brush down to 2% now, and I'm going to go in there and just, again like we were doing before, help separate some of these stripes. Could even turn the opacity down further. It's still pretty bright because we've got such a dark background that it's really quite noticeable. So I'm going to put that up down to, if you noticed, I put that down to 5% opacity, maybe put it up a smidge at 3% size. We're still on that blue colour. This is still a separate layer, so if it goes wrong, we can just remove it. It isn't a problem. Just going to double up some of the effects that we've got here, maybe create more of a sense that it's going through there as well. I'm going to turn the size of the brush up, in fact, so we get more of a background colour. I'm going to put it to about 10%, which is quite dramatic, but I'm just going to extend some of this green up into the scene. Maybe bring some more of that bluish colour down a little bit further. I'm going to reduce the brush down to 5% again. Bring some of that blue colour a little bit further down. I might even go a bit smaller on the brush, down to 3%. Okay, so I'm going to go to my layers again. I'm going to go to layer 10, which was the first colour of the Northern Lights. I'm going to press the plus symbol, go back to my colours. Now I've got a really vibrant green here. It's really powerful. So we'll just check the opacity. We're going to leave it at the 5% and leave it at the 3% size, 5% opacity. So I am going to bring this colour in, but I want to do it in a controlled way so that it's not going to immediately overpower. So we can bring this in sections. Just ramp up the saturation of the green that's coming in here. Maybe turn the brush size up to about 5%, just bring a bit more green here. And if you wanted to, you could always just change the placement of that. So let's put it underneath layer 10. And we're going to have it as an influence that's coming through slightly underneath. Whichever, I actually think it looks better on top. Let's put it back up. You get to the point where you're feeling a bit more confident. Let's just go for it. So reduce it down, get some more fine details in here. Yours may have gone off at a slightly different tangent than mine. You don't need to slavishly copy to everything that I'm showing you. I'm just helping you understand the overall effect and how to build it up, hopefully. And then you can do your own thing. So I'm going to go back in with the Smudge Tool. Perhaps just move that around a little bit in places. Create some agitation there, some general movements. Go back in with my brush tool, maybe just recondense it again in a couple of areas. I'm going to just turn it down to 2% and I'm going to turn the opacity up to 10%, which doesn't sound like much, but when you're using this colour on that dark background, actually that's super rich. Okay, so I'm going to create another layer. I'm going to put it above the other effects. I'm going to go to this brightest colour we've got, so that's the second one in. I'm going to stay on my soft brush, so it's going to be 2% size, but I'm going to turn it up now to about 25% opacity. And I'm just carefully going to start bringing out some areas that I think I just want to heighten the impact of the glow. So I am pressing lightly, really tapping and adding gestures really lightly, building it up, just to really heighten the glow of what we've already got. You can do it more manually like this and let it build up, put the time in, just really sit back and look at it and see how it's working. But there is another option. We can go to the layer 10 that we created most of the light colors first. We can then go to the adjustments, go to the bloom setting, turn it up, and you'll see that it does bring a lot of that light and glow through. So I'll slide it back down so you can start to build it up yourself, or you can just help the process further along. I think 100% is perhaps just a little bit too much, so I'll dial it back. So I'll dial it back to about 90%, and you can see the impact of that. And you can try it with the other layers we've got. So we've got a layer 11. We can see what it does to that. We'll go to the bloom setting. We can turn that up. You decide whether it's working or not. Again, we can dial it back to exactly where we think it creates just the right balance. So on my example, I'm going to put it at around 80%. And we can go through the layers. So let's have a look at layer 12. I add the green color on it. We'll do the adjustments, bloom, and ramp it up. Bring out the brightness, why not? I'm going to go back to my top layer, and I haven't got a white selected, but you could always do that. So let's add that. Let's add a white. So you might have noticed that it was there in the beginning, but it doesn't really matter. I've just double tapped in this area and it's automatically selected pure white. I'm going to turn that down to 3% size and really quite low on the opacity, so about 5%. And I'm just going to use that just to further sell the absolute brightest point that it's emanating some real light there. So it's just really going to further ramp it up a little bit more with just points of white. But you don't want to do too much. You're only going to do it within the center of your brightest areas, just so it's really maxing out with some bright white there. Okay, I'm just going to go to the very top layer. We had some of the texture down here. I'm going to go to my color here, and I feel like I just want to perhaps bring out some of the brightness there a little bit more. Not too much, but I just feel like it needs to ramp up there a little bit. So we're still on the soft brush. I'm on 3% size, and well, it's quite low. It's at 5% opacity. Perhaps I'll turn that up to 10% or thereabouts. And I'll just bring out some bright highlights just to contrast a little bit, not too much. And we can just hint that there's some more texture and things going on in here. You see, I can be quite rough, just allowing it to create a clear division between the land and the mountains. And then obviously we've got the bright, vibrant colours of the background too. I can even go in there with the adjustments, Gaussian Blur, just to blend it in a little bit if it's competing too much. So it doesn't really matter what's down there. Our main focus is in the sky. Having said that, let's have a look at the mountains. So let's see where we were with the mountains. So we had the mountains there, we had the dark bits there, and we had some other sections. So I'm going to go to where the dark section of the mountains were. I'm going to tap on that. So in this example, it's layer 6. Press the plus symbol again, and I'm going to go to my colours. I'm going to use some of the colours that we've got in the sky. So I'll probably go for this slightly darker version. With my soft brush, I'm going to put it down really low to the lowest end of 2%, and it has to be super low on the opacity, so again, about 5%. And I'm just going to go in, and I'm only going to just ever so slightly hint that there's a bit more of the light impacting on the mountains too. So I don't want to overdo this. I'm just creating just a hint of it. As you can see in here, it's bound to reflect it in places, so we'll just add hints that it's impacting the actual edges, something like that. Don't do too much. Anything that's facing inwards like this, so this angle is facing up here, so it's going to just in places reflect back some of that light, and then likewise over here it's reflecting back up here, so it could again reflect back. I'm just going to take that top layer, I'm just looking at it now, I feel like I want to push it a little bit further up, so I'm going to merge it down with the layer underneath, and all of that there, and then I can merge it down again so that all of that bottom bit is on one layer. I'm going to go to my transform tool, keep it on freeform, and I'm just going to extend it up a little bit until I find the point where I'm happiest with it. And I think that is about that point. Okay, I'm going to leave that tutorial there at that point. I hope you've enjoyed watching and following along. Do make sure to share your results with me and press the like button on this video, a thumbs up. It really helps out the video and the channel, and it's massively appreciated. Catch you back here soon. See you later.